Born on January 23, 1921, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, to French-Canadian parents, Leo Major moved with his family to Montreal before his first birthday. Due to a poor relationship with his father, he moved to live with an aunt at age 14. Major joined the Canadian Army in 1940 to prove to his father that he was somebody to be proud of. Major was serving with the Régiment de la Chaudière, which landed on Juno Beach in the invasion of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944. During a reconnaissance mission on D-Day, Major captured a German half-track by himself, killing all of the half-track soldiers. The vehicle contained German communication equipment and secret codes whose possession was critical to Allied intelligence. Days later, during his first encounter with an SS patrol, he killed 4 soldiers. However, one of them managed to ignite a phosphorus grenade. In the resulting explosion, Major lost one eye but continued to fight. He continued his service as a scout and a sniper by insisting he needed only one eye to sight his weapon. According to him, he looked like a pirate. Major single-handedly captured 93 German soldiers during the Battle of the Scheldt in Zeeland in the southern Netherlands. According to the Ottawa Citizen, Major and his friend, Corporal Wilfred Arsenault, were assigned to determine the fates of a company of recruits that had disappeared after being sent to capture a town. However, as Arsenault fell ill, Major went alone. After finding the company's abandoned equipment and determining they had been captured, Major entered a house to find shelter from the rain and the cold when he spotted 2 German soldiers walking along a dike. He captured the first German, used him as bait to capture the other, and brought his captives to their commanding officer. The officer and his company, totaling around 100 men, surrendered, though 3 of the soldiers were killed by Major. In a nearby group of houses, SS troops, witnessing the company surrender, opened fire on them, killing 7 and injuring some others. Major disregarded the enemy fire and continued escorting his prisoners to the Canadian front line, ordering a passing Canadian tank to fire on the SS troops. He marched back to camp with the surviving 93 prisoners. Allegedly, Major was chosen to receive a Distinguished Conduct Medal. However, he declined the offer as, according to him, General Montgomery, who was to present him with the award, was incompetent and in no position to be giving out medals. Whether he actually got this nomination and why he would not have received it is not clear. The National Archives only contains records of his later Distinguished Conduct Medal recommendation from 1945. An article in Trau claims he received 7 days off instead, which he spent in Belgium, and that he was not present to receive his Distinguished Conduct Medal because his car would not start. However, Dirk Stott, conservator of the National Militaire Museum, has done research on Major for 2 years and doubts the usual telling of the events, arguing that there were no reports of a Distinguished Conduct Medal recommendation and that one person escorting 93 prisoners is unfathomably difficult. In February 1945, Major was helping a military chaplain load corpses from a destroyed Tiger II tank into a universal carrier in Keppeln, Germany. After they finished, the chaplain and the driver seated themselves in the front, while Major jumped in the back of the vehicle. The carrier struck a landmine, the resulting explosion killing the chaplain and the driver and knocking Major unconscious. Major claimed to have remembered a loud blast, followed by his body being thrown into the air and smashing down hard on his back. Upon regaining consciousness, he awoke to find 2 concerned medical officers trying to assess his condition. He simply asked if the chaplain was okay. They did not answer his question, but transported him on a truck to a field hospital 30 miles away, stopping every 15 minutes to inject morphine to relieve the pain in his back. At the beginning of April 1945, the Régiment de la Chaudière were approaching the city of Zwolle, which was shown to have strong German resistance. On April 13th, the regiment's commanding officer asked for 2 volunteers for a reconnaissance mission into Zwolle, their tasks being to scout the German force and, if possible, make contact with the Dutch resistance before an Allied artillery barrage could commence. Private Major and Corporal Arsenault stepped forward to accept the task. However, Major and Arsenault, wanting to spare the city from destruction, agreed to attempt to liberate the city themselves. That night, Major and Arsenault entered the farmhouse of Hendrik van Gerner, who gave them rough positions of German emplacements near the railway tracks. After leaving the farmhouse, Arsenault was killed by German fire after accidentally giving away the pair's position. In a radio interview with RTV Zwolle, Major told that he became mad after that, but managed to control himself. Major killed 2 of the Germans, but the rest fled in a vehicle. Deciding to continue his mission alone, Major entered Zwolle near Sassenpoort. What happened after that is unclear. Stories about Major's actions in Zwolle have been exaggerated and conflated with his other deeds, and there are several conflicting accounts of what actually happened, including several contradictory accounts from Major himself. However, what is certain is that Major spent several hours in Zwolle. The German military left the city, Major contacted the Dutch resistance, and he returned to camp with Arsenault's body. Thanks to Major's efforts, the planned shelling of Zwolle was called off, and the Régiment de la Chaudière entered the city the next day without firing a single shot. For his actions, Major received the Distinguished Conduct Medal. The most popular and oft-cited story claims that Major, armed with several machine guns and a sack of grenades, launched a solo assault on Zwolle, using gunfire and grenade explosions to trick the German elements in the city into believing a large Canadian force was assaulting the city. After killing several German soldiers and making contact with the resistance, the German force fled, and Major returned to camp to report his findings to the commanding officer of the Chaudière. Certain versions of the story add or change details of what Major encountered in the city, such as him taking the driver of a German military vehicle hostage or assaulting the local SS headquarters. According to Major's official recommendation for the Distinguished Conduct Medal, written on May 20th, 1945, to save as many Dutch lives as possible, it was necessary to know exactly the location of the enemy positions, many of which were not known. Private Leo Major and Corporal Wilfred Arsenault from the scout platoon volunteered to enter the town and contact the underground movement to obtain the necessary information. At the entrance of the town was a roadblock guarded by a small group of enemy. The patrol was discovered and the corporal killed. Private Major killed 2 Germans and scattered the others. Undaunted by the death of a friend and comrade, he continued to patrol alone for 6 hours, contacting the underground and formed patrols of the local Dutch civilians, with the result that by morning the enemy garrison menaced from inside and from outside were forced to withdraw as their position became untenable. To urge them on, Private Major had the Gestapo headquarters set on fire. At 400 hours on April 14, 1945, this gallant soldier waded across a canal after posting numerous patrols of the Dutch resistance movement at strategic points. On his way back, though wet and tired, he picked up the body of his corporal and brought it in. According to an article written after Major's death from the Canadian Army Journal, Major was carrying 2 Sten guns and a sack of grenades. He arrived in the center of Zwolle at about 00:100 hours and found the streets silent and deserted. Here, he spotted a German machine gun nest, which, since the crew was sleeping, he promptly attacked and eliminated. He then found a German scout car and forced one of the Germans, who he had captured, to drive through the streets with the lights on, flying a white flag. For several hours, Major moved through the streets in this manner, shooting at any target he could find, making an impression that a large Canadian force had arrived. The citizens were awakened, but were afraid to come out of their houses. By a stroke of luck, Private Major came across the head of the local resistance, Fritz Kuipers, and 3 of his men. By now the Germans appeared to have fled the city in panic. The group therefore returned to the town hall, and the resistance fighters brought the citizens out into the streets. The local radio station was used to announce that the town had been liberated. Major was exhausted, but he had to complete his mission by bringing back the body of his comrade, Wilfred Arsenault, to his lines. The resistance fighters arranged for a car to transport the body back, but were fired on by outposts of the Chaudière. Major was furious and climbed onto the top of the car so that he could be easily seen from a distance. In this manner, he returned to the Canadian lines to report the result of his mission to his commanding officer. A similar version from a 2005 article from the Ottawa Citizen claims that Major worked his way to the city center, captured the driver of a German staff car outside a tavern, went inside the tavern with this captive, and disarmed the officer who was drinking inside. The 2 communicated in French, and Major learned the officer was from Alsace-Lorraine, a region near France that was not terribly committed to Adolf Hitler's rabid designs. Finding the officer did not mean any harm, Major gave the officer his gun back, saying the war was almost finished, and he was a member of the advance party, though he didn't say he was alone. He said it was a lovely town and he didn't want nobody to destroy that town. Major then spent the next few hours engaging patrols whenever he could and setting off grenades where they would make noise, but do little damage, and killed 4 SS members during an attack on the local SS headquarters. By 4 in the morning, Major learned the Germans had left the city and tried to signal the townsfolk to come outside. However, he found that this was difficult, as they were unsure of who he was. Linking up with the resistance, Major returned to camp with Arsenault's body. The Dutch newspaper Trouw offers a much less fantastical account of Major's actions, presenting the solo assault story as a legend that Major entertained, and that the actual operation was much more simple, as the Germans had already mostly left. He reached the city and walked through deserted streets. He knocked on doors, but nobody dared to open the doors. After a while, I was so tired that I couldn't think straight anymore. But I had enough information, and I encountered enemies nowhere. He walked around in circles, left the town, and came to a farmer whom he reassured by pointing at the word Canada in the inside of his hat. Quickly, he came in contact with the underground resistance. He was able to return to his unit with the message that the enemy left Zwolle. But in the decades that followed, Leo Major became a Rambo, who, according to many, conquered street after street, wildly shooting around on certainly 1,000 Germans who persistently resisted. It was a story that he, so his friends mildly laugh, in the end started to believe a little bit himself. A 2017 article in Jonge Historici offers a similar account, stating that Major simply walked through deserted streets and established contact with the underground resistance. After that, he returned to his regiment, where at 9 o'clock he reported that the enemy had left the city. Similarly, in an interview with De Stentor, National Military Museum curator Dirk Stott, who had researched Major for 2 years, argued that much of the popularly accepted story is a myth, with no records or proof of any incident happening that night in Zwolle. Stott also believes the vehicle used by Major was not a hijacked German military vehicle, but rather just the car of the head of the local resistance, Fritz Kuiper, which Major also used to ride back in the morning. Descriptions of him setting the city on fire like Rambo while he was shooting around him and threw grenades through the city, Stott doesn't think that is the right image. They have read police reports about that night, and within them they read nothing about the unrest. The Germans' scene would have been the tail end of the retreating occupation, which fits the modus operandi of the retreating Germans. They kill prisoners and destroy dossiers. And what is more effective to destroy dossiers than to set the building on fire? A radio program about Leo Major by RTV Zwolle agrees with Stott's argument that the Germans set fire to the house on the Pockietersingel, where the German police held office, to destroy their documents. The program included an interview with Major, who described the events of the night. He stated the first thing he did was go to the railroad station, because he thought that's where the Germans would come in, and he had heard from Hendrix von Gerner that some of the bridges were destroyed. He entered the city through the Sassenpoort. All the people he met were either collaborators or German, and the German I met, most of them were drunk. He made noise using grenades and machine gun fire, and believed the noises he made startled the Germans into fleeing. After the conclusion of World War II, Major returned to his former job as a pipe fitter. He also got an operation to fix his back, which had bothered him since the landmine explosion in February 1945. When the Korean War broke out, the Canadian government raised a force to join the United Nations Command in repelling the communist invasion. Major was called back and ended up in the Scout and Sniper Platoon of 2nd Battalion Royal 22E, Regiment of the 25th Canadian Infantry Brigade, 1st Commonwealth Division. Major fought in the First Battle of Mariang San, where he received a bar to his Distinguished Conduct Medal for capturing and holding a key hill in November 1951. Hill 355, nicknamed Little Gibraltar, was a strategic feature commanding the terrain for 20 miles around, so the communists were determined to take it before the truce talks came to an agreement that would lock each side into their present positions. Hill 355 was held by the 3rd U.S. Infantry Division, who linked up with the Royal 22 Regiment on the Americans' western flank. On November 22nd, the Chinese 64th Army, around 40,000 men, began their attack. Over the course of 2 days, the Americans were pushed back from Hill 355 by elements of the Chinese 190th and 191st Divisions. The 3rd U.S. Infantry Division tried to recapture the hill, but without any success, and the Chinese had moved to the nearby Hill 227, practically surrounding the Canadian forces. To relieve pressure, an elite scout and sniper team led by Leo Major was brought up. Armed with Sten guns, Major and his 18 men, wearing running shoes to silence their movements, passed through enemy lines and crept up Hill 227 from the Chinese side. At a signal, Major's men opened fire, panicking the Chinese, who were trying to understand why the enemy's fire was coming from the center of their troops instead of from the outside. By 12:45 a.m., Major's team had retaken the hill. However, an hour later, the 190th and the 191st, totaling around 14,000 men, launched a counterattack. Major was ordered to retreat, but refused and found scant cover for his men. He held the enemy off throughout the night, though they were so close to him that Major's own mortar bombs were practically falling on him. The commander of the mortar platoon, Captain Charlie Forbes, later wrote that Major was an audacious man, not satisfied with the proximity of my barrage and asks to bring it closer. In effect, my barrage falls so close that I hear my bombs explode when he speaks to me on the radio. Major and his platoon held Hill 227 for 3 days until relieved by the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division. Major died in Candiac on October 12, 2008, and was buried at the last post-fund National Field of Honor in Pointe-Claire, Quebec. He was survived by Pauline de Croiselle, his wife of 57 years, 4 children, and 5 grandchildren. A documentary film about his exploits, Leo Major, Le Fantôme Borgne, was produced in Montreal. To commemorate the 75th anniversary of victory in Europe, Canada Post issued a stamp in honor of Major, the One-Eyed Ghost, on April 29, 2020. The Canadian band Mystery released the song Pearls and Fire about Major on their 2023 album Redemption.